in having ivory towers or high technology that only a few people can access, if the majority are still living in slums or in rural areas, isolated from all of this. So for this, I mean, India's biggest problem, and this is what every visitor to India says to me, is its corruption, the bureaucracy. It's so stifling. If you live there, it takes ages to get anything done, and if the corruption affects everything from ordinary, you know, trying to get the policeman to take care of tiny jobs. You know, if you get robbed, you have to bribe the policeman to even take that seriously, all the way up to the top. If you're a professor in a university, there will be corruption within those hierarchies that means certain people get promoted and others don't. So it infects every part of society, and it's a problem that affects all developing countries. According to Transparency International, which does studies on corruption, all the households below the poverty line in India, so these are poor people, together pay more than $200 million in bribes every year. Now, what does this do to an economy, to have that proportion of people paying such a huge proportion of wealth that they can't afford to lose, to be losing it to something like bribes? What Indians need, obviously, is more transparency. They need a more streamlined government. So, of course, this being a geek nation, they're trying to achieve it using technology. And to give you an example of how that's happening, I want to read an excerpt. This is just the second excerpt I'm reading from around halfway through the book, in the chapter on electronic governance. And it's actually called Geek's Rule. The ground beneath our feet is always moving. 200 million years ago, South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica weren't where they are now, but were part of one enormous supercontinent that spanned a whole hemisphere of the planet. The split happened around 30 million years later, after which they gradually drifted into the positions they occupy today. When this violent breakup happened, gigantic volcanic ranges burst through the crust, while vast new oceans filled the gaps that the shifting continents left behind. The Earth looked like a pie that had been torn into slices. At its edges, the land buckled and creased. In the north of India, the Himalayas were created. And when India's west coast finally broke free from the island of Madagascar, another one of these geological creases became the Western Ghats. Today, this 1,600-kilometre stretch of high hills, blanketed in forests, is one of the most remote places in the world. There are at least 5,000 different types of flowers. Elephants, snakes, tigers, and cave bats all live here, secluded from the rest of India. Zoologists who have occasionally ventured into the Ghats have found new species by the handful. One time, they discovered a dozen multicoloured types of frog, including a species that was thought to have been extinct for a century. The mountainous territory is inhospitable. The second I cross into it, civilization disappears. It's eerily silent in every direction, save a cry from the odd macaque. I can't get a mobile phone signal. And yet here, in the middle of the Western Ghats, in what can reasonably be called nowhere, I descend into a steep valley and find myself in one of the most advanced cities on Earth. I arrive in the evening, just in time to catch dinner at one of the first restaurants in this half-built metropolis. It's an American-style diner, and I'm their only customer. There are pictures of Lucille Ball and Betty Boop on the walls, and the floor is covered in black and white checkerboard tiles. The food is served by staff shaking their hips to Elvis on the jukebox. They slide bottles of French's yellow mustard and Heinz tomato ketchup onto the countertop of my red leather booth. This could be New York in the 1950s. But this isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the city of Lavasa. I first read about it in an advertisement in an in-flight magazine and became intrigued by what the advert claimed will be a metropolis governed mainly by machines. A bank of centralized computers, I read, will control everything here, from household security to the transport network. It's a $500 million project to build from scratch an urban dream in the middle of the mountains. Even the roads leading here have had to be carved out of the hills. It's the biggest thing to happen to the Western Ghats since the Cretaceous period. So this is a city of Lavasa, and I can tell you it's really surreal turning up there in the middle of the night, pitch black because the workers had all gone home. The restaurant was still open. There was a few staff there to serve me dinner, and around me, pitch dark hills, and here I am in this American diner, and I can assure you it's the most authentic American diner I've ever seen, although the food wasn't so authentic. The most interesting thing about this place, like I said, is that it will be electronically governed. That's the aim. So, for example, one of the things that they've done is they've mapped the city in layers. So everything from water lines, broadband, power lines, everything has been put onto this electronic grid they have on a computer screen. So as soon as something goes faulty, they'll know exactly where it is. They can pinpoint it and fix it immediately. Every house in this huge complex, and it is enormous, will have a unit inside the house. So even if you don't have a computer, you'll be able to access the intranet through this kiosk, which will let you pay your bills. If you have a complaint, you can contact the city manager, you can tell them about it. If you want to invite your neighbours to a party, you can tell them. If you want to check what the traffic is like or the weather, you can do it using this one kiosk inside your house. And the temporary manager of Lavasa, he's the interim manager. They're going to elect a real mayor once people start moving in, so nobody's living there yet. Told me that the aim is to have as few people running the city as possible. Essentially, because of technology, the city will run itself, all thanks to technology. Now, this is not a replicable thing. It's a private development, and it's for rich Indians. The apartments and the chalets in this place, most of them are already sold to actors and actresses who live in Mumbai, which is a few hours drive away, are fairly pricey. And the population of the place will be capped at 300,000. So it's like a big, giant gated community, essentially. But even though it is an idealistic community, this electronically governed city, the kind of principles that you see in it are being replicated across India by the national government. I'll give you a few examples of that happening. Since the early 1990s, there have been state attempts to move all government records online, and they're actually working. They've achieved quite a lot of that already. So land records, birth and death certificates, on a huge scale is now going online, which means that something that you would take weeks to access before, now you'll be able to do it at a flick of a switch very, very quickly. And the whole thing, I mean, I've seen bits of this project happening all over the country, but the place where it's run is in Delhi at the Ministry of Information Technology. Yeah, they have a Ministry for Information Technology, and it's called Electronics Niketan. That's the name of the house, which literally means electronics house. I am naturally allergic to Indian government ministries. Every time I've gone to one as a journalist, I've hated it. I've wanted to kill myself at the end, because Indian bureaucrats are famous, civil servants are famous for not turning up to work until like 11 or 12, knocking off at 4, taking really long lunch breaks. You're just sitting there all day waiting for something to happen.
They're clones of New York State bureaucrats.
Yeah. India did it first. And it's a nightmare. I mean, I went to the health ministry once and got bitten by a poisonous spider inside the health ministry. My foot swelled up like a sweet potato. I couldn't even walk. So I was scared that day that I had to go to the Ministry of IT. I just thought, what kind of nightmare am I going to encounter? And I gave myself lots of time, waiting time, had some water with me, my iPod. I was shown in. The person I had an appointment to see, I saw immediately. This place was like a well-oiled machine. It was like no other ministry I've been to on earth, and completely like any other Indian government ministry. And it's run and populated almost solely not by civil servants, but by people who have worked in the private sector in India's IT industry.
Okay, forget New York.
So this place is where they're collecting examples of good electronic governance from around the country. They're monitoring Lavasa to see what examples from there they can take and borrow and use in real cities and real villages across India.